Good morning, Scott here, known as Cantaloupe to some online, and I'm bringing a video to you on a subject that's interesting to me. It might be of interest to you or someone you know. And I want to talk about Star Wars, kind of an overview of the whole franchise, including all of the various spin offs and TV shows and cartoons, but also especially the original three movies, and then later on the three movies that came out after the millennium, I believe, mostly after the millennium. I'd have to check my dates, but the original three movies were very different, and they were extremely popular. And I want to talk about why they were popular, not just because they were great movies or as a synopsis or review or critique of the movies, but because I think that maybe there's an opportunity to show that I understand why they were popular and to prove that I actually do like Star Wars. I've not made this video before, so it's overdue. And if you're not into Star Wars, maybe tune in later. But this is going to be a fun video for me to make anyway. Star Wars, the original three movies were very different, like I said. And, you know, many movie series, such as sequels, and then by the third one, you start to see a dip in quality, usually because they're trying to just cash in on whatever momentum they gained with the first movie, and usually the second movie. Used to be you could count on the sequel, that is the second movie, being of decent quality, and it was pretty predictable by the third one. Things would start to taper off a little bit. It wouldn't be as fresh or as original, or their budget would not be as big because they're kind of just wrapping up their cash grab at that point. And unfortunately, it's true. But nowadays, things are a little bit different. Nowadays, budget is much less of a concern, I think, for movies. It's obviously a big concern still, but it's not like the whole main predictor of how good the movie's going to be like it used to be back in the day. The original Star Wars had a respectable budget. It was not, large by modern standards, but they put a lot of work and labor into that movie. They had top-notch writers, George Lucas, and the actors and the story itself was very, very good. They had a huge opportunity, and it was a grand slam three-part movie series. But here's the thing. Also in the original Star Wars, the third movie with the Ewoks, and it got a little campy, it got a little cringy, and people who were into it for philosophical reasons or sci-fi reasons originally, and that was a big part of the crowd. It was a very popular genre of subject matter at the time for literature and movies. They started to taper off by the third one. I think that it became, there was a nod to the kids with the little stuffed animals running around. These are called Ewoks. If you didn't see the movie, the crew ended up on a planet of Ewoks that they mobilize against the Empire, and it got a little bit ridiculous. But like I said, that's kind of predictable by the third movie. But here's the thing: the original three movies were different than the movies that came later. And I don't really need to dive into the timeline. There's a historical timeline within the story where the first three movies actually occurred after the setting of the later three movies that came. Like in terms of history, they went back in time for the last three movies, which was a little bit confusing to people. But that's not the only thing that confused people. Now I want to talk about this a little bit. The last three movies, and not the most recent three movies, but the fourth, fifth, and sixth movie that came out in the franchise, post-millennium, I believe. I'd have to check my dates. They used a very different angle. The computer effects, the sound effects, the graphics were the main thing at that point. They had become the main thing. And granted, there were a lot of special effects in the first three movies. There was a lot of work done and a lot of, looking back, it looks a little bit campy, but they were great effects at the time. If you think about when those movies came out in the late 70s and early 80s, compared to all the other movies, it was very, very impressive at the time. But it became much cheaper to use CGI, computer graphic imagery, for the fourth, fifth, and sixth movies, and they did. And they did so much, it actually set a precedent. It set a precedent for lots of sci-fi movies and movies in general, that it's more about sensationalism and special effects than having some kind of meaningful or possibly edgy or uh, conflicting story matter. If you think about the first three Star Wars movies, they were controversial. They were a little bit controversial because there was it was on the tail end of the 60s. You know, the 70s followed the 60s, and the Star Wars original three movies came out at the late 70s, and there was still a spirit of protest. There was a spirit of rebellion, and this is prominent in the movies, in the setting and the story, where you have the rebels fighting the Empire, and it's not really unclear what they're trying to say. They're trying to say that you can be large and impersonal or small and hungry. And it's a lesson that holds true to this day, where to have integrity, to have honesty and decency, sometimes it means being closer to your roots. It means having values that are more about people and friends and family, like you see in the original movies, than having power and efficiency and having money and technology and weapons, which was the alternative that you saw. And these two sides fighting each other, and ultimately the underdog, the rebels, winning in The Empire Strikes Back, and finally in the third movie they won unequivocally. But so here's the thing: getting back to your roots as an administrator, as some kind of official, like such as you saw suggestions in those movies of our types of structure, our types of government structure, especially in Europe, but we have it here in America as well, with administrators, authoritarians, people having chains of command, where there's obedience expected in a military style, and it's very strict, and there's a lot of animosity and seriousness and hatred and violence. It's contemporary. It's contemporary, and you didn't so much see this with the rebels. You saw the rebels as being about heart and loyalty and ingenuity. And my point by mentioning all this stuff is that all of it was absent from the later franchise, starting with the fourth movie that was released onward. They made it about slightly interesting but not really pivotal or meaningful subjects. So there was some kind of war going on, there was some kind of battle, but a huge amount of special effects, and they expect the audience to be as satisfied. So you go in and you see your graphics, your computer graphics, that are obviously very streamlined at this point. Post-millennium computer graphics became pretty cheap to manufacture, and the special effects, the sound effects, were a little bit unrealistic, if we're being honest. A little bit unrealistic. Nothing sounds like that. I mean, you wanted to be amazed by the special effects, of course, but you didn't want it to be the entire movie. You didn't want it to be all about sensationalism. You wanted maybe to think about it for a few days. That I'll speak for myself, honestly. If I see a movie and I'm not still thinking about it the next day, it's by definition unmemorable. It's unmemorable. And I base my opinion on any movie I see on pretty much how long I think about it afterwards. If it stirs something in me, if I feel something, or if I am exposed to a new idea and I learn something from it, that means it was a really good movie to me usually, and I'm happy to tell people positive things about it. And it's sad to me that the franchise was taken over apparently by people who failed to understand the original message, or were just categorically on the opposite side of the spectrum and didn't want to communicate it. Maybe they understood the message just fine, and they chose instead to make it about money, to make it about box office receipts and push button graphics, because that's what it became. It became a computer program. And that's all it's ever been since then, as far as I can tell, including the cartoons and the TV shows. And While people have fond memories of Star Wars, it has, for me, it's a very sad franchise now. It's a sad memory of something that had a lot more potential and ended up just getting gutted and mined and sold as parts. That's what it looks like. So, you know what I'd like to see in conclusion? I'm over 10 minutes already. I'd like to see a reboot of the Star Wars story from the original perspective, where there was some philosophy, there was some real gritty truth in it that might not appeal to every single person, that might not appeal to ultra right-wing conservatives, for example, because it didn't and it shouldn't. That's not the story of Star Wars. It's the story of how the underdog and the rebels are victorious, how good prevails over evil, not how you can obtain obedience and domination. That's a lot of people kind of went that way with it, but that was never supposed to be the message behind it. Anyway, reach out if you like with questions or comments to whitehotrobot@gmail.com or comment below. Thank you. Bye.